Hello, this is Todd Luck, and this is a review of the first plot line of the Savage Sword of Conan by Marvel Comics. So they have completed the first plot line, that's the first 5 issues, and so this is a non-spoiler review. I've already reviewed the first issues of each of the 3 Conan titles that Marvel is putting out now. So Conan the Barbarian I didn't really care for. Age of Conan Belit was a little better, but it just wasn't something I would personally pay $4 a pop for. Savage Sword I did like, so I ended up getting the whole first plot line. Part of the draw here is these beautiful Alex Ross covers. This first one actually has a little bit of connection to the interior story, and the others don't. I mean, this is just like random stuff Alex Ross is painting of Conan, but it is gorgeous. My only criticism is they print a little bit red, but other than that, you know, it's still Alex Ross. It's still just a treat to see him paint Conan. And this is a really cool cover. I mean, Belit does not appear in this issue at all. This has nothing to do with the interior, but it's just so cool to see a painted cover of this time in Conan's life and, you know, see Belit on there like that. It's just cool. And this one is actually my favorite. This is issue 4. I just love this pose with the axe over the shoulder. Just really, really captures Conan really well. I love this. I'd love to have this as a poster. And this is the final issue of this plot line. And this is, looks like a Barry Windsor Smith homage. And it's kind of an interesting idea here. So I think it's paying tribute to covers like this. Try not to get the reflection there, because they used to do that on some of the old Conan comics. Not really Savage Sword, but some of the regular issues. So it was kind of an interesting idea, kind of cool. But anyway, yeah, the covers are great, and I think they're definitely part of that draw if you're getting the single issues, which I think you still can. I think you can still hunt down those single issues. Now, for some people, an Alex Ross cover is worth $4 all by itself. To me, it really does add to the value, but I still want to get something good on the interior. And as I pointed out in my first review, the artwork starts out absolutely gorgeous, and this is fantastic stuff. And so the artwork gets a little simplified, a little sketchier as it goes on, but I feel like it still works. I prefer what was in the first issue over the later issues, but it still looks good to me. It kind of reminds me a little bit of John Romita Jr. or Frank Miller, and it works. I mean, fantasy art can be, you know, kind of sketchy as well. You can do abstraction and you can do simplification and, you know, cover everything up in shadows and all that good stuff, as long as you understand the fundamentals of what you're doing. You know, you need to understand anatomy, you need to understand how shadows fall on things, you need to understand storytelling and layout, and this artist, Ron Garney, absolutely does. He's a very old hand at this, a classic artist, and like I said, even if I feel like his artwork gets a little looser as it goes on, it's still good. The first plot line is called The Cult of Kuga Thune, and it is about an evil wizard who is connected to the Serpent Men, who are classic Howard villains, and he's after a treasure, and so is Conan. And so the Serpent Men in here are not necessarily the classic version that we've seen in previous comics. That may be because IDW is doing a Cole miniseries involving those Serpent Men, and so that may have tied up the rights and prevent Marvel from doing, you know, the classic Howard Serpent Men. I'm not sure. What they come up with as a substitute is pretty cool in the first issue. I really like this fight scene in Savage Sword #1. And I guess this would be a minor spoiler, but that sort of creature does not appear after the first issue. So I was slightly disappointed by that. They do other things with the Serpent Man motif, and they're pretty good. There's definitely some satisfying action, some cool visuals in the rest of it. The storyline does get a little more sparse after that first issue. it gets a lot more decompressed, the bigger panels and all that stuff. And there's just less in the issue. It takes almost no time at all to read through the 20 pages. That first issue had a nice chunk of story, but it also charged an extra $1, so it had more pages. But it's not just the decompression. It felt like there was just less it had to say in those issues. And, you know, there's Conan, and then he has a couple allies. He has Suti, who is a former slave, and then Menez, who is a warrior woman. And we just don't know anything about them. We also don't know anything about Thune, the wizard. We just don't know hardly anything about their world or who they are. And, you know, that's not always necessary, but I think it really can flesh out and make you care about the characters more, and it's just not done here. And it's just weird, as little as 5 issues is, that it felt like the writer didn't have enough to fill that 5 issues, even with the giant decompressed panels. And there's some minor lapses in logic. For instance, here we have cultists with their faces covered, and she hits one of them, but somehow, at the same time, she somehow grabs the mask that the cultist has on. Like, how would she have hit him and grabbed the mask in the same movement? And here Conan is cornered by these 2 guys, and somehow he does a standing jump that carries him over both of their heads onto this donkey. What does he have, like superhuman jumping powers? I mean, I guess this is not as bad as him breaking a spear with his neck muscles in Conan the Barbarian #1, but I just don't feel like people know how to write human beings in a fight scene anymore. They always give them these weird superhuman powers that, like, they shouldn't have. And there's a plot twist with Menez at the end, which really doesn't seem to jive up with how she acted in issue 3. And again, I'm not going to spoil anything, but there just seem to be some contradictions there, and I'm just not sure where that plot twist even came from. And she turns on a dime after that anyway. It's just weird, and, you know, I feel like they probably could have lived without that plot twist if they couldn't, you know, develop it correctly. And while I felt there was some cool action in there, the fights with Thune himself were typically anticlimactic. He just would tend to go down way too easy. And I don't know if they're holding back because he's the villain in Savage Avengers and maybe they're planning on doing something spectacular. Maybe we'll get an army of those serpent creatures or something. I don't know. But it just felt a little anticlimactic with him in this particular plot line. But all those minor nitpicks aside, it is a solid plot line. Gerry Duggan, the writer, has a good solid grasp on Conan. So there's nothing perfect here, but everything you get is pretty solid though. The story's solid, the artwork is solid, the covers are amazing, and you even, as an added bonus, get 3 pages of a serialized Conan story in prose and the back of each issue that will continue for the first 12 issues. So for all of that, I think it's worth $4. I think you're getting a pretty good package. Again, not perfect, but good enough to justify your $4. And for how to read it, if you do want to get the plot line, I would recommend probably picking up individual issues because you will have these gorgeous covers that you can display. And I think you can probably, again, still get these issues. Trade paperback would be my second choice. At least you get one Alex Ross cover on the front of the darn thing. So that's pretty good, but you're not going to be able to display each cover because, you know, it's a trade. It only has one cover. And so my overall thoughts on Marvel's Conan launch, now that I've sampled all 3 titles, a little disappointed because when I read Conan Classic back in the day and got the beginning of Roy Thomas's run, I was excited and I wanted to get the rest. When I read Dark Horse's launch of Conan with Kirk Doucette, I was excited, I wanted to get the rest. Here, I'm pretty content with just getting this first Savage Sword plot line and just, you know, kind of letting it go. So there's several differences here between Marvel's new launch and the previous launches. One is that those previous launches were for one Conan title. So that's easy to follow and easy to kind of wrap my head around, like, which Conan do I want? The Conan, the only one that they're putting out. Secondly, just the quality of the product. And again, Savage Sword had some good guys on there who had a pretty good grasp of Conan, but I just don't feel like it's quite as good as we've had in previous launches. And lastly, those previous launches started at the beginning of the Conan saga and promised to tell the story of his entire life, promising that he would become king one day and you would see him grow and go through adventures to get to that point, which is super exciting. And then, you had the Robert E. Howard adaptations as the North Star to guide Conan through those adventures. And so this new launch doesn't have any of that. This is just like random stories from Conan or Conan's world. And that's not quite as exciting. And I understand that Marvel does have Conan appearing in Avenger titles, which is very exciting because Conan has never appeared in modern day times in the Marvel Universe outside of What If issues. So having that happen in continuity is pretty exciting. That being said, those are Avenger comics, not Conan comics. As far as the 3 Conan comics, that doesn't seem to have any bearing, at least not that in any of the issues I've seen. As far as if I'm going to pick those up, yeah, eventually. But Avengers is a very continuity-heavy book, and in order to know where those characters are at, and oftentimes, what's going on in the Marvel Universe, if they reference current events, I like to have read the other comics, and right now I'm several years behind where they're at on, the regular Marvel comics, your Avengers and all that stuff. So I'm going to eventually get there, but probably in trade or digital, and it'll probably be a year or two. And so I'll probably read those eventually. For the Conan titles themselves, I'll keep my eye out, and if something catches my eye, I'll certainly pick it up. I was a little disappointed Savage Sword dropped the Alex Ross covers after that 5th issue. I think Alex Ross covers alone, I would definitely be tempted to pick up the rest, even with a new creative team. So, by the way, Savage Sword is now a regular comic. As you can probably tell, it's no longer the 50-page black and white magazine, but it is different creative teams every story. So it's very similar to how Legends of the Dark Knight used to do it. So I'll keep my eye out if there's any new Conan stuff that catches my eye. But right now I'm mainly just personally focusing on reading a lot of older comics that I've built up. And I'm following the American Mythology, Edgar Rice Burroughs line, and I'm doing reviews of those. And one of the things I think that makes the new Conan stuff a harder sell for me is that there's just so much stuff that you can pay the same price or cheaper for in trade paperbacks and back issues. And if you're interested in some of the older Conan stuff, I do have 2 videos of reading recommendations. One is about how awesome Roy Thomas's original Conan run is, and the other is reading recommendations outside of that run. And so that's a few hundred comics that could keep you busy for a little bit. So look up those videos if you're interested in like what Conan stuff I really love. But anyway, that's all my thoughts on the Conan launch and Savage Sword and all that good stuff. Like and subscribe for more videos, and until next time, see ya.